We're just talking hypothetically and taking on characters in this episode because
Yeah. Yeah,
for
no, this
reasons.
is not us. If somebody quotes us in this episode and they're like, "Can you believe they said this?" I was like, "Could you not tell this was a comedy episode?"
Could you not tell this was a deep
Nope.
fake?
I am saying these are the type of questions that in a hypothetical world where victim blaming was not a concept that was shamed, somebody might ask. How would we test whether the phenomenon of men physically abusing their wives is caused primarily by the wives or caused primarily by the husbands? And then the other person would say, you in weird science world where we only care about data. I guess what we would need is a control situation. We would need a population where some women dated women and some men dated men.
Oh
And then
God,
we
we're
would
going to
need
hell.
to look at the level of physical abuse within these two populations. What are the physical abuse rates in lesbian relationships? What are the physical abuse rates in male gay relationships? Oh no. They're much lower than in straight relationships and male gay relationships and much higher in lesbian relationships. Oh no, this is not what the data was supposed to say.
Would you like to know more?
So we were like, well, I mean, we haven't ruined our careers enough as it is. And why would you let someone else cancel you when you can just cancel yourself? So today we
Right?
talk about victim blaming and why there's a case to be made. Oh my
Well,
God,
no,
we're going to
so
hell.
victim blaming is one of these really interesting things where I think it started as a good concept for people, right?
Yeah.
Way the like don't be ashamed to see a psychologist movement was
Mhm.
really healthy to start. Some people needed to see psychologists back when psychologists were still healthy. And then it became a never ever criticize a psychologist for doing anything and never ever say somebody should stop seeing a psychologist that they're seeing because that person is employing cult-like abusive practices. And then that allowed cult-like abusive practices to begin to proliferate within the psychologist community because you are not allowed to tell somebody anymore, hey, actually, the things that psychologists are doing with you are actually very similar to cult tactics, building dependence. You need to get away from them. How dare you shame me for seeing a psychologist? It's always valid to go to somebody who affirms anything I do, no matter the cost to myself or my community. That's what I need, my affirmer. Or the person who tells me, oh, you have some deep-seated thing in your past and you can only fix it by coming to see me repeatedly. But then the same thing happened to and that's dependency right there, right? And then the same thing ended up happening with this other group, which is victim blaming, right?
Now we're not talking about victims of systemic racism, natural disasters, blah blah blah. We're talking about typically
No. But there was a reason. Like it used to be too common in the past. I'll admit, it used to be too common. People would see a woman who'd get raped, and they'd be like, "Well, look at the way she was dressing," right? Like,
in totally inappropriate situations. These are women who are going about their work, going about their lives, who are being attacked, and super not okay.
Fear of an attack like this, and they would say something like, "How could this have happened?" Right? And then their initial reaction is to say, well, it must have been the victim's fault. And this is something that happens in society. Like this is a natural inclination that humans have to want to blame the victim. And so it was important that we had a movement that pushed against this. But the movement went insane and ended up creating a prohibition because, if you look at our on signalers or people who are status signaling, they realize they could raise their status within their group by pointing out this behavior in others, even when it was a justified behavior, that ascribing any fault on the part of a victim of something, i.e. that in any way they contributed to the probability of that thing happening to them, was an immoral thing to do and lowered your status within the community. Now, this is a problem because, obviously, there is always some level of I did something that increased the probability that a negative thing happened to me. I'm reminded of the Die Hard scene, right? I don't know if people remember this. I think it's from Die Hard 2 or something, where the guy's walking around a black neighborhood with racist billboards on him or something.
Oh, gosh.
And you're like, oh my God, because the bad guy's making him do this.
Not to get too personal, but a white man standing in the middle of Harlem wearing a sign that says, I hate niggas.
is they got some serious personal issues. And you got about 10 seconds before those guys see you. When they do, they will kill you. You are about to have a very bad day.
right?
Oh,
And
okay.
you are scared for this individual in this environment, and somebody comes by and is like, "Hey, you shouldn't be doing this," and tries to, and that's how he ends up with his, I think, partner for that movie. So yeah, it's a good movie, but the point being is, if that individual ended up getting shot or injured in that community, you can be like, well, how dare you say that the fact that he was walking around with a racist sign in a predominantly black community, how dare you say that influenced the crime? But even woke people wouldn't say that. They'd be like, yeah, of course that influenced the fact that he was injured. It's the
Yeah.
same thing with children. You have a child, right? Like, a child gets hit by a car because they ran across the street without looking both ways and waiting for their parent. That is a tragedy. Is it partially the child's fault? Yes, it's partially the child's fault. Like, I'm sorry, that is a horrible thing to say it is partially that child's fault. People could be
Yeah.
like, well, the child wasn't fully sentient yet or anything like that. It's really the parent's fault. Fine. Let's talk about an adult. If an adult crosses a road without looking both ways and they get hit by a truck, and I'm like, look, obviously the truck shouldn't have hit them, but it is partially their fault. And they're like, well, that's a horrible thing to say. It is okay. It's a horrible thing to say, but there is a reason we need to be able to victim blame.
Mm.
Let me explain what that reason is. It is because if we don't do that, then I cannot learn from that incident. I cannot say, oh, it is dangerous to cross the road without looking both ways. And then I cannot teach my children about that. I can't say, if you don't look both ways before crossing the road, you may be hurt. And somebody's like, come on, nobody's saying that. Okay, imagine I say to my daughter, if you go to a nightclub dressed like that, you may get raped. And then somebody's like, whoa, 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 that's victim. Well, the crime hasn't even happened yet. I am merely pointing out an increase in statistical odds due to a behavioral pattern. If you go down a dark alleyway by yourself at night, this bad thing may happen to you. And somebody would be like, nobody is actually out there occluding people learning about these risks in a fear of victim blamingness. And I would say, actually,
Not
no.
true. Super not
Actually,
true.
you
Yeah.
might
So, like,
I
I because I can give that personal example. So, I can speak from personal experience on this because I was raised in a culture where victim blaming absolutely 100% was not permitted. But then I also was completely blithely unaware that doing certain things was going to put me at risk of certain things happening, or that there were even like implied expectations to certain things. So, um, I mean, a lot of this happened like when I was, traveling and whatnot. Like I would walk around Beijing or Tokyo, like wearing a mini skirt and fishnets, and then be surprised if someone fondled my ass. Like, well, of course, because I was walking around alone as a teenager in a major city wearing a mini skirt. I mean, okay, there was another instance when I was in college where a guy invited me to go to a concert with him, and it was we went to school in DC, the concert was in New York, and I'm like, "Oh yeah, that sounds great." And he's like, "Okay, great. Like we'll take this $5 bus there." So like the plan was to just bus up and then bus back and then like sort of pull an all-nighter and call like the first bus in the morning. And then like later he updated me like, "Oh, my dad got a hotel room, so, we're not gonna be out on the streets all night." And I'm like, "Okay, great, fine. We'll just do our homework there." And then, like surprise, surprise that like I get to the hotel room, pull out my homework and start doing it, and he starts hammering back screwdrivers. And I'm like, "Oh, okay, whatever."
I decided to cut the meat out of this story because it's very uncomfortable to listen to. All you really need to take away is that the situation was very, very dangerous for Simone, but nothing ended up happening. However, if things had been slightly different, it could have gone very poorly for her.
It was a very awkward night and nothing ultimately happened, but it did then lead to him being really mad at me and me feeling really like confused and kind of scared by what happened. And like that's because no one had told me like if you put yourself in this situation, if
Yeah,
you
if a
go
guy pays for a private room for you
and
and
you go into
people
the hotel room and then you get into a bed and then he starts drinking like you know, and I went I still didn't realize that this was an issue. When I came back and I told, like, my roommate what happened because she was like, "Hey, man, what's wrong?" Then he's just like, "Oh, that is not okay. Like, I can't believe that happened to you." It was never like, "Wait, you didn't know?" Like, no one said that to me, which is insane.
Well, and if people can't understand, so Simone, you got really lucky that this guy understood like no means no,
Yeah.
etc.
Yeah.
But a lot of women end up putting themselves, and people don't understand. They can be like, that should have been the most obvious thing in the world. Simone is an intelligent person. You
Well,
guys have seen her.
I am
She's an
autistic.
intelligent, thoughtful person because she grew up in an environment where this view of slut shaming, or sorry, where this view of victim blaming was so extreme that she was never taught basic things around expectations that may be set by her actions. She put herself in an incredibly dangerous situation.
Yeah.
This is not like a joke point. Like, this is when you fight against this, when you fight to say, actually, we do need to victim blame a bit, you are fighting against women getting raped.
You're fighting against female victimhood. You are fighting for female safety. And this isn't a female versus male thing. This goes both ways. Like, people who put themselves in very risky positions are going to be subject to this, regardless of, who they are and what race or gender or background or educational level or IQ they are. It really doesn't matter. This is about what risks are you subjecting yourself to, right?
Right, and we need to understand that risks are not fair. It
Mhm.
doesn't mean you shouldn't be educated about them. If
Mhm.
you are X ethnicity, you probably shouldn't go into Z neighborhood and do B. This
Yeah.
is something that historically we understood. It's not good that that happens, but it
Yeah.
is good that we teach our kids that that happens if they're at risk of it.
Yeah.
Now we have entered a society where you cannot do that. And that creates enormous, enormous risk for young people. But hold on, it gets worse than that. So I'm going to talk about some statistics that are shocking
Mm.
and that allow you to investigate issues that we as a society are told we are not allowed to investigate.
Okay.
So we're going to talk about spousal abuse.
Oh boy.
Whoa,
We're really going to hell for this.
we're
Yeah.
talking about
Thanks.
wife abuse. Worse than that.
Mhm.
Okay. So I, as an outsider, somebody who is not concerned about whether, and keep in mind, all of this is just a hypothetical framework here. I'm not saying this is what I think. I am saying these are the type of questions that in a hypothetical world where victim blaming was not a concept that was shamed, somebody might ask. And so somebody in this hypothetical world might ask a question like, is it women's fault that they are abused by their husbands? And then another person would say, how dare you ask that? But that doesn't exist. So somebody can't ask in this world, how dare you ask that? Instead, they would ask, how would we test that? How would we test whether the phenomenon of men physically abusing their wives is caused primarily by the wives or caused primarily by the husbands? And then the other person would say, a view in weird science world where we only care about data. I guess what we would need is a control situation. We would need a population where some women dated women and some men dated men.
Oh
And then
God,
we
we're
would
going to
need
hell.
to look at the level of physical abuse within these two populations.
And unfortunately, lo and behold, this
No,
is
the individual
possible.
would say, yes, yes, yes. Let me pull this up. Okay, what are the physical abuse rates in lesbian relationships? What are the physical abuse rates in male gay relationships? Oh no. They're much lower than in straight relationships and male gay relationships, and much higher in lesbian relationships. Oh no, this is not what the data was supposed to say.
Now,
Um,
caveats, throat clearing, etc. It may be that men are just far less likely to report abuse. It may be that women are far more likely to over-report abuse. But the
But
numbers are
I'm
very
saying that none of this
distinct.
is true in our world. I'm not saying that in our world, lesbian relationships are much more likely to have physical abuse, or that gay relationships are much less likely to have physical abuse, or that this would mean anything. I'm just saying you, as a viewer. Hypothetically, if you were to look this up, what conclusions, and you did live in this alternate world where all these things were true, which obviously isn't true in our world, what would you take away from it? But it gets more interesting than that because I also look in my own life of instances where I have seen physical spousal abuse, which have been rare, but I know of really only one in my larger friend network. Oh, no, two. One, it was because his partner kept stealing things from people. And he kept telling her to stop doing it, and she didn't listen. And then he became physically abusive. The partner, this guy was living on a very tight budget. Like, they were not doing well financially. And she went out and splurged on designer purses without his permission. And he had asked her to not do that before. And sometimes I wonder, obviously, these are all hypothetical situations that didn't really happen. And I'm not discussing my real opinions here. But these are all situations where I just have to wonder, like, I don't abuse Simone because when I went into a relationship, I vetted for a partner who I respected and who I admired and whose actions I always knew were motivated by a desire to make the world a better place and to achieve her personal value set, which I align with. And if my partner, if Simone ever strayed from that path, I would leave her. If she ever started acting in a way that was optimized around personal vanity or hurt other members of the family, I would leave her before I would ever physically abuse her. However, there are certain people in this world who just are unwilling to do that. They are primarily concerned about themselves and their vanity and how they signal to the world. And there are certain other people in the world who can't get a better partner than that. And I think that this is partially why physical abuse happens was in relationships where people are on the lower quality of partner. Um,
Well, and I
they're
think
just
often there is abuse on multiple ends. Sometimes one partner physically abuses after being emotionally abused. I would also, I mean,
oh yeah, I think a
I
lot of these are
personally would see it abusive if I had very limited funds and somebody without my consent spent my money. So I mean, I think another issue with some forms of spousal abuse is that the abuse that gets prosecuted, reported, and seen as societally most unforgivable has been triggered by other forms of abuse that society doesn't, for whatever reason, see as egregious. But this is a cultural thing, and I do think that like this is a very very difficult moral situation because, for example, you have honor killings where like a family will kill a female relative because they feel that she dishonored the family in some way, which most people that would be entirely like she didn't do a thing, she just acted normal, right? And then they think it's right to kill her as a result. So I mean, like, I do think that it gets very very dangerous when violence is the retaliation that people choose, and
Well,
often
violence
people.
is a retaliation that people choose often not as a first resort, but either because they are mentally impaired. So let's be clear. I think usually when violence is chosen, it's either because the person is mentally impaired because of drugs or alcohol, or they're just generally mentally impaired, or they feel that they have no other way to effectively communicate with their partner.
Right, like they've tried everything else and
They tried telling them, don't take the family credit card and spend all our money. They've tried everything else. And they feel that it would be better to be physically abusive than it would be to leave their partner.
hmm,
However, I want to be clear. I think that this is a minority of cases of
yeah.
spousal abuse. I actually think that the majority of cases of spousal abuse are due to mental impairment, i.e., drugs, alcohol, and stupidity, and lack of emotional control. But I also think that there is a level of reciprocality to this, as Simone pointed out, is one partner is abusing the other partner in a way that is socially accepted. And so we don't see that a lot of really terrible people deserve each other. And we're not allowed to. Somebody comes to me and they go, look at all these horrible things my wife did to me, right? And I know this is terrible because now, oh gosh, this is going to really piss off the red pillars where I'm like, what? Even men are responsible for when they are emotionally or financially abused by their wives? And I'm like, yeah, generally my thought when somebody comes to me, a man comes to me and he's like, look at all these terrible things my partners have done to me. And I'm like, okay, well, what are you doing? Like, it's either something that you're doing in terms of how you're sourcing your partners, or it's something that you're doing in terms of how you're relating to your partners. Because I have, as I've talked about, I've been in tons of relationships. I have slept around a ton. I dated a ton before I met my wife. I never, like, it's not that I never had partners who did things that were manipulative, but when they did, I broke up with them immediately before the situation ever escalated. I never
Yeah.
allowed somebody to treat me like that in
Or
an
you didn't expose yourself in a way that would allow you to be manipulated in that way. And I think a lot of this is like people are allowing themselves to be exposed in a way that
Well, and here's something that people will say. I'll also say somebody will be like, "Yeah, but what with a man? A man can beat you if you leave him." And I'm like, "Yeah, and a woman can claim you raped her if you leave her." I
yeah.
actually had one person threaten to do that to me. Threatened to say that I had
Ugh,
raped her
it's
because I left her.
terrifying. I think that happens more than
Yeah, it
we would
happens
like to admit.
more than people think. And then in that situation, you need to be very careful. You need to navigate the situation. And I think that the women are like, what? A man beating you is so much worse than a woman claiming you raped her. And I'm like, are you actually serious saying that? Do you understand that you can have your whole life ruined? You'll never be able to get a job again. If you're a woman and you survive that, even if you walk with a limp or something, I would prefer a limp or even the permanent facial deformation than a rape record on my public record in trying to
I do
live my
think,
life.
yeah, it would be interesting to do a poll of like both men and women, like, would you rather live with X or Y? Like, permanent rape accusations or like having like being kind of beat up, like pretty beat up, maybe to the point of hospitalization for
Well,
one day.
hospitalization and permanent, like maybe a limp or permanent like scars or something.
Yeah, although I don't think most cases of domestic abuse
I'm not
involve
saying
permanent
that. I'm
scars.
talking about an extreme
Yeah,
case.
but yeah, you're just going all the way to be that, yeah, to show how extreme it can be. Yeah, that would be an interesting study. So I want to point out two important points on this issue that I think need to be considered when people are looking at it. One is that I think a big culprit in this problem becoming a problem in the first place is that people want the world to be fair. And the reason that they don't tell women that they shouldn't dress a certain way, or they don't tell their children that they shouldn't go to a certain neighborhood, or they shouldn't do this or that thing, is because it's not fair. It's not fair that I can't walk around a city in a mini skirt and not be groped. It's not fair that I can't, be in a hotel room with a guy and not have him crawl into my bed without my permission, right? Like it shouldn't be that way, but it is that way. And because the world isn't fair, it's just that I think there's this weird like perversion where like we're trying to dress for the world we want. We're trying to dress for the job we want, or like we're trying to behave for the world that we wish existed, but that world doesn't exist. So that's just one point I wanted to make. The other point, and I think this is devastating, but also something that is not discussed enough, that may be too spicy and you may have to take this out, is that it's under it's under discussed the extent to which sometimes being in an abusive relationship is better than the counterfactual. That some people stay in abusive relationships because the amount of resources or safety or happiness otherwise that they're getting out of it makes the bad stuff worth it. And that many people are being abused over a long period of time because they've made a mental calculation that is sober and logical, and they've decided this is better than the alternative. And I think in many cases, abuse crisis centers and stuff like that don't, they
Mm.
make things worse because they're putting women in very dangerous situations, saying like, you either have to get completely out of this relationship, or we won't help you. And I just want to point that out. Like sometimes
So, hold on. I
people,
need to highlight what she means by this because I think people may not be. Imagine you are dating a billionaire, and this billionaire is abusive to you. And I won't say that like we have friends in this situation, but like we probably not billionaires, but like very wealthy people who have dated women and clearly were abusive to them. And the woman's like, look, I don't have a skill set outside of being a trophy wife. If I divorce this guy, he's got a solid prenup. My life is worse than being abused. And people are like, oh, how could you say that? And they're like, no, but really, think about it. Would you rather have somebody beat you every day, but have or cheat on you every day in front of you, or degrade you every day, and have to never worry about money, have all the luxuries you could want at your fingertips, and the alternative is that you are living under an impasse or in a homeless shelter? I think most people who aren't caught up on this sort of bizarre pride hypothesis that our society has today would be like, yeah, that's better. Or imagine I even reframe the question. Somebody's abusing you every day, but your kids get their college paid for. and your kids get to go to private school, what do you do then? A lot of people would say this is a no duh thing for
Yeah,
me.
and you have to like consider that a lot of jobs or just like menial factory work that is just mind-blowingly
Mhm.
depressing and boring and just it takes your soul away. Or many customer service jobs. Like the amount of verbal abuse that some people are subjected to just through their work every day is worse than the verbal abuse they might be subjected to in a not good relationship that maybe gave them more financial security or connections that allowed them to get a better job, right? Like there are trade-offs, and I think people discount also how cruel the world can be.
Yeah, the average world for a person without a college degree and with
Even
any
with
sort
a
of
college degree, all sorts of people, like depending on who you are and where you are, like it just
well, and this is
the
one of
real
the
world
things
is
with the Ayla story, when people are like, "Oh, don't you know all the terrible things that happen to women who work in the sex work industry?" And she's like, "Bitch, do you know what I was doing before sex work? I was working in a factory. Okay? I hated every second of my life. And I then was able to do something that, yes, it was degrading. And yes, it opened me up to risk in life. But look at where she is today. Look at who her friends are today. Look at her. Like, she could, like, a lot of people, when they
well,
see
and
how,
I think it's degrading by some people's standards, but like to other people doesn't really matter. And like to her, I think working in a factory was way more degrading than doing what she did. What she did was like an intellectual exercise that was very interesting. She optimized a ton. She learned a lot. She built a platform. Like, I think a lot of it also has to do with like people's personal preferences. And to some people,
yeah,
like just like literally like living in a shabby house and not being able to like buy designer bags is way worse than being in a very bad relationship, but having all those things. And like you just
you're thinking of
sometimes
specific individuals. I know what you're thinking of, but
but
hold on.
sometimes you have to trust that someone understands what they care about.
Yeah, but I also want to go to the Ayla situation because I think a lot of people, they see like our culture line, like we like Ayla, we'll have her on the show again. We think pretty highly of her, and they're like, well, what you mean is you have differences of opinion, but like you don't actually agree with her lifestyle, right? And I'm like, no, I actually do agree with her lifestyle. Even if it was my daughter, if the alternative to sex work was spending every day as a menial peon in a factory and having no alternatives to that in life because she did not have alternatives at that time of her life, I would say I'd rather you go. I don't want you to go down this path. I don't want like as me as a dad, I would prevent this from ever happening. I'd give them money. I try to help them. I try to get them out of that situation. But she didn't have a family at that time. She had been disowned by her parents. She was completely on her own. She had no formal education.
And she
And
hadn't been raised to believe that she was able to take other types of jobs on. She just had been raised to believe that she was going to be a mother and housewife, homeschooling kids for her entire life. So she didn't even know. Like she wasn't given the worldview that would allow her to even do anything different. So like, come on.
yeah, and I think that we as a society have entered this stage where we are unwilling to see that there is often no better option for many people in the more desperate parts of society. I often say that seeing Ayla's story as an outsider is like and being like, wow, she's a slut. It's like seeing the ballad of Fancy May and being like, wow, Fancy, she was real slut at the end of that story. And it's like, were you not paying attention? I'll play it here, Simone, because I know you have no idea what I'm
I
talking
have
about.
no idea. Sorry. Guess I'm just not cool enough.
It's a class.
Thank you. Okay. Guess I'm not American enough. Jesus. Sad. But yeah, I mean, I just, yeah, I think it's an important conversation, and this is definitely something that colors the way that we do and plan on raising our kids. And that I think this is very connected to this internal locus of control thing. The never blame a victim is an external locus of control heuristic, whereas the blame the victim, even when it's not the victim's fault at all, is the extreme of an internal locus of control heuristic. So you can
Yeah.
only imagine, like culturally, of course, we're going to take this position. Like
Oh,
anyone watching this would
I'd
have
actually say
predicted
we
that we
take
take this
the
position.
extreme position. When we're raising our kids, I'd be like, I does not matter if you were the victim or not. You are always responsible for the things that happen to you. And somebody like, oh, how can you say that? And I'm like, look, a person who believes that they are always responsible for the things that happen to them and the individual decisions that they make are going to be less likely to make the decisions that lead to bad things happening to them.
Yeah.
And somebody can be like, ooh, that's so consequentialist. So you only care that you lower the probability that your children get raped, and you don't. Yes, that is all I care about.
Yeah.
Grow the fuck up, okay, you idiots. I'm so sick of this nonsense and the damage that's caused by it, because they are leading to real people getting murdered by their partner. They are leading to real people getting raped. It was a good sentiment to begin with, but now it causes infinitely more suffering than it relieves. And you do it because you are a justical, and you pretend that by not telling women that if you do X and Y, you are more likely to get raped, that you are lowering the number of women who get raped, when that is objectively not a true thing. You are increasing the number of women who get raped because you didn't warn them, and you let them enter situations like the one Simone entered. It is just as evil as saying, I won't victim blame, therefore I won't teach a child to look both ways before crossing the street. What you are doing is evil, and you are evil, and genuinely, I hate you almost as much as I hate the rapists of this world.
Come here, kid! I'm gonna tie you to the radiator and grape you!
Okay, that's how he grapes people. That's what he does. No! He's the grapist. These kids were obviously horrified.
Not that girl. Look, she's totally asking for it.
What?
Look at her. She's begging to get graped.
Will you listen to yourself?
Look what she's wearing. It's purple.
Oh God. Oh boy.
And that's just a side note. You know,
Yeah.
whatever.
You may
Everybody's
direct
gonna-
your hate mail to Simone and Malcolm at wedonotcare.com. We are very sorry, and we apologize and take back absolutely everything we say. Not really.
Yeah, no, all of this was discussed in a hypothetical universe where people...
100%. Yeah, we're just talking hypothetically and taking on characters in this episode because
Yeah,
the
no, this
reason.
is not us. If somebody quotes us in this episode and they're like, can you believe they said this? I was like, could you not tell this was a comedy episode?
Could you not tell this was a deep fake?
Yeah, complete deep fake comedy nonsense. And the fact that you didn't get the joke is your fault, not ours, okay?
Yeah.
Because the joke was against...
Stop, you're blaming the victim again. Oh no. Oh no.
The joke was against the rapists. It wasn't against the individuals who were victims. That they were the people that we were trying to stand with this joke. And I mean that as sincerely as a human could. And this was all an alternate world, Malcolm and Simone, in this conversation.
Yes.
I love you, Simone. You're great. And I appreciate that you're the type of woman who doesn't, you're amazing. You're
Well,
just
I was
amazing.
different, right? I was the opposite version of this, and I
Yeah.
got burned, and I didn't even realize I got burned. And who knows, like the stuff that could have happened to me, really, it is very fortunate that worse things have not happened to me based on the way that I knocked about the world with this old mindset. I could have been one of those girls who was like, I'm going to go backpacking through the Middle East, and they subsequently disappear.
That's one of my
you know?
favorites. It's the most horrifying story. I don't know anyone who's ever heard it, but there was this girl who, a lot of people go like hitchhiking, backpacking around the world. And she said, I am going to prove that the Middle East isn't dangerous for women because it's not. In a justicalist mindset, they don't care what's true or what's not true. They care what would be just if it was true.
They're living for the society they wish existed.
And so
They
she
make it.
decided to hitchhike through Europe, no problem there. A mile and a half in, I might just post on the screen what ended up happening to her.
Yeah,
but
just post on the screen. Let's not hear it. Keep my delicate ears safe from this
I
story.
love you, Simone.
I love you too. Thinking beautiful thoughts.
Beautiful thoughts. That could have happened to you.
It really could have though. So yeah, guys, hide your kids, hide your
Don't
wife.
tell your kids this, and whenever anybody pulls this nonsense around you, shame them and point out that they are contributing to more of the very behavior they claim to be trying to prevent.
Yeah.
Love you.
Adore you.